Welcome to the Fantastic Story Society, a place for the most unusual stories and storytellers, including your masters of ceremony, Max Tim and Scott Marcus.
I like creepy.
Well, you are creepy in some regards. So
I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, everybody, welcome to the Fantastic Story Society. I am one of the hosts, Max Tim, and we have
Scott Marcus,
our wonderful spooky door opening. I still can't get over it. But we've got a pretty cool interview today for a documentary, or a director for a documentary on Amazon Prime called Hellier. His name's Karl Pfeiffer. Scott, you met him at one of the conventions.
Yeah, first it was Sault Ste. Marie up in the Upper Peninsula, I should say, in northern Michigan. I mean, looking across the channel to Canada, way the hell up there. And met him briefly. I've known Greg and Dana Newkirk for a few years at this point. They are the two main subjects, I guess you would say.
I haven't met them, and I don't know them, and I think I love them.
Yeah. They're very entertaining and engaging people. They run the Museum of the Weird. I think I'd been checking out their website, which was the Weekend Weird, for a very long time. Clearly, they like fantastical stories because they focus on weird so much. And they've evolved from just telling unique stories to now collecting haunted artifacts and going on tour, sharing the stories of these bizarre artifacts and trying to learn about them more, and kind of crossing the line between the paranormal and the just oddball, and celebrating the strangeness out there.
They have so many weird things. Yeah, they have so many weird items, and you can go to their site and you can find them on YouTube, and obviously this documentary.
The documentary Hellier, first off, documentary series, I should say.
Yeah.
Season 1 is out now. 5 episodes long. Season 2 is in the edit bay, but getting close to release. So it's kind of a fun time to talk to a filmmaker because he's in the weeds right now. Mm-hmm. Everything has been shot, and now he's got to piece it all together, and with a deadline approaching, which is never a restful time for a documentary independent filmmaker. But they get the call of a very unique story, and the call is the call of inspiration for Karl, that he finds a story and he wants to pursue it, which takes him out of his comfort zone, out of everybody's comfort zone, because they're trouncing through small town, very rural, very remote Kentucky, around caves and just the wild in general. And I'm excited to talk to you, Max, about some of these types of stories that we ourselves sometimes get called to leave the safety of our living room and go see what's out there.
Well, and that's kind of the beauty of story, because sometimes you don't know it's going to be fantastic when it begins.
Yeah.
You tend, there's just an inkling most of the time where you're like, this might be kind of freaking amazing.
What? You're hoping for an adventure.
Yeah, and I think that was really what was going in Greg and Dana's brain when that email came through from this strange person in Kentucky, that the guy said he's got goblins in his cave and you got to come and help me get rid of them. So that's a pretty big interesting start to a story. But you're going to learn a whole bunch about Hellier. Karl Pfeiffer, the director of it, is going to talk about in the second segment here. But why don't we just talk a little bit about what we're up to? Scott, why don't you talk about what you're up to, and then we can segue a little bit into your fantastic story of the evening here.
Well, sure. I mean, basically what I've been up to is kind of a fantastic story in and of itself. As Max mentioned, I think in our very first episode, I do a lot of work with a local archaeologist out in the Chicago area. And it's one of the things that I love about telling ghost stories is you end up making all of these different friends from all these different walks of life. And he'll be a guest one of these days, but his name is Dan Malone, and he is an archaeologist that studied Egypt. He goes to Africa fairly regularly. He even owns property out there now and out in Kenya, and goes and finds these ancient sites. And we've explored in Arizona, and we first connected because of a haunted location in Chicago that I wrote about that he was doing archaeological research on. And that was a long time ago. This is 2003.
Wasn't that long ago?
Yeah. Yeah, he was. And I always say this because I always love to give credit. And I'll never forget that Dan Malone, he was a total stranger at the time. He was the first person that bought my book that was not somebody that I already knew. He was not a friend or a family member. He was somebody
That's right.
I would say Googled it, but maybe he Lycosed it or web crawlered it, way back when. He said, okay, well, you've done some really good research, and I'm kind of using what you've learned as I continue to go out there. Now let me show you what I've found. And to go to a haunted site, not on a paranormal investigation, but on an archaeological expedition, was a whole different way of seeing something, and really colors so much more of what the place is really all about. So, and we've been able to do that many times. So sometimes I'm going to, let's say I've heard a legend that there's a haunted woods here, and there's a legend that a witch used to live in this house way back in the woods behind the cemetery. Okay. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but that's actually one of the stories that we've pursued.
Oh my God.
And we, sure enough, you go out there with an archaeologist into the woods, and he knows how to read the land differently than somebody that hasn't got this type of training.
That in and of itself would be the reason I'd want to go on a hike with him.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that tree.
Exactly. Well, and that's actually funny. That takes me to a different location where we were. There's legend that there used to be a camp or an orphanage, a very urban legendy ghost story about this location. That I don't believe any of the stories behind it. I've done research to find out that there was a building back here, and it was these different incarnations. But why the place is haunted, I still don't know to this day.
Isn't that the Robinson Woods?
No, actually, I'm talking about the Gate in Libertyville, Illinois. Now.
Oh, the Gate. Oh,
yeah, which is actually the cover of
the music.
Yeah. Well, the Gate was, as the different legends goes, either a sleepaway camp, it was an orphanage, it was a school, something along those lines. And at some point in time, a madman comes across the area, whether it's the principal has gone nuts, there's an escaped convict, an escaped lunatic from a nearby asylum, something along those lines. Cut to the end. A whole bunch of kids get killed. Their heads placed on the stakes of this gate that still stands to this day. And I think it's a mysterious place now just because there's this beautiful big Gothic gate with a path that just leads into the woods, and there's nothing back there. So why does this gate exist?
Yeah.
As my voice cracks, why?
I'm so scared.
Research tells us that actually all of these places actually did exist back here. It opened in the 1920s as an orphanage. It was a Boy Scout camp once upon a time. It was never a school, but it did actually embody a lot of the places that these urban legends claim it did. Now, we know there was not a mass murder of children with their heads placed on the spikes of the gate, so we know that's not real. But where does the urban legend come from? Yeah, exactly. But I feel that you go into folklore and urban legends, and they come from something. Sometimes it is just kind of an old wives' cautionary tale, but I've heard so many really credible firsthand accounts of hauntings in this area that even though I've never experienced anything here, I do believe it's haunted, and I don't know why. So I hear that some of these really credible accounts that people have stumbled across some foundations of buildings, and it's there where they've been chased out of the place by screams, and they hightail it back to their car running as fast as they can, and the screams are following them all the way up to the property line. Pretty chilling stuff. So I've gone back there a few times as a ghost hunter, and I could never find any foundations. So I wasn't sure if that was even real. But it's so much different when you go back there with an archaeologist, because we're walking through the weeds back in the woods, this creepy haunted forest preserve on the north suburbs of Chicago, not too far from Wisconsin, really. And then Dan says, "Look!" And I freak. I just freeze and like, "Oh, what? Did you see a ghost? Did something scary just happen?" He's like, "No, there's a pine tree over there." What? Are you on a scavenger hunt? What's going on here? And he's like, "No, look around. We are in an oak forest. Why would there be a pine tree there unless somebody planted it as part of landscaping? Which means there's probably building foundations right by that tree." And we walk over, and sure enough, he's right. And it's that kind of insight that is very natural for somebody that does this for a living, and that is completely foreign to somebody that's never thought like that.
Love that.
So that's why it's so fun to go out with Dan, to bring him to a place that I'm trying to research. He has a different eyes for it.
Yeah. Are you doing stuff with Dan right now? Is there a project you're on?
There's lots of open projects all the time, but something that we did just this past week, which was not haunted, not a ghost story, but still very, very cool. I can't give the location exactly, but it is the south suburbs of Chicago. There, we were working with a guy who is a historical society I think he's the president of the local historical society down there. And he said there's a cemetery in these woods somewhere. And he had some general knowledge of where it was. It was an old farm cemetery. He believed that there were maybe 10 graves back there, but they've tried looking for it and they haven't been able to find it. They know it's back there. So I don't know how you define it. Can you call it a lost cemetery? I'm not sure. But the Forest Preserve, which owns the property now, has no record of it. So I guess in that sense, it's lost because it's only a cemetery that exists by speech, by people telling the story to each other. And Dan and I went back there and we followed the instructions that were given to us. And we did not find anything where the legend had it. But we kept looking around and we eventually did find a number of toppled gravestones back in the woods. It was very exciting to find these things that people haven't seen in so long. I actually have the chills as I'm talking about it now. It's that level of excitement. And the really neat thing was, so we went out there, we documented it like an archaeologist would, where everything is measured. Every dimension you could find of the gravestone, the physical dimensions of where we believe the cemetery is, where the iconic like landmark type of rocks or trees or any kind of landmark type distinctions are for future people to go in there. And then it's a little bit controversial to do a grave rubbing, but there's a right way, even a right way. Some people say you should only take a photo and that's it. But some are so old that you need to get what you can off of it
like
while there's still something to be
tracing
gotten.
Paper kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have the right kind of paper, you have the right kind of wax, black wax to do a grave rubbing. So we do that to the graves that we find and measure everything, spent all afternoon there. And Dan said, is like, yeah, I don't think anybody in modern time has been here. We go back now that we've collected all of our data. And we are on the way back, and the president of the Historical Society says, well, let's stop over here. The woman that lives here, she's a family member of the family that has bodies buried there, and she's never been there. We asked her about it. We assumed that she had been there. She's a family member, but she's like, no, I heard it's back there, but I've never seen it myself. And he's like, well, we found this, and we showed her one of the grave rubbings, and she just stopped. She said, that's my great grandma.
Oh, my God.
And that was a powerful moment.
Yeah.
It was very, very cool. Like history coming alive right in front of her eyes.
Wild.
Yeah,
well,
it's awesome. I love when I get to do stuff like that. That's not at all haunted, but it's a hell of a story.
Well, it's an adventure. It's a fantastic story because there's an end. There's an end result. Because how often do you actually find what you're looking for before, when you set out to find something?
There was such a bow on this one, yeah. Being able to bring it to an ancestor and see her reaction was really rewarding.
It's why we watch these shows, as many as you can name. Curse of Oak Island is one of them on Discovery Channel, or is the History Channel, my bad. And they never find anything. And I still, I shouldn't say that. They find stuff here and there, but and it's enough to lead you on, like, they might actually find they're
getting closer.
Ark of the Covenant. I think they're going to find it. Come on, they're not going to find it. But you're doing it anyway. But that's why the story that you're given is just like, yeah, come on. You actually went out with the idea, a plan. Hey, a pine tree. Meanwhile, your great grandma is buried here. That's just wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And now this is something that, I've continued to do, and I've been lucky that I've been able to do it. But it's something I think we all do when we're a bit younger, when we have that free time is a little easier to come by. And I know you went out looking for trouble and found some one time.
we didn't even know what we were doing. It wasn't even trouble. I mean, I was a senior in high school, and I think it was the night of our fantasy football draft or something. Like, school had just recently started. My buddies and
One of those landmark moments in a young man's life.
It was a fantasy football draft. And we ended early, and we, of course, it's relatively late, considering school night or whatever, 9:30 or so. And so we used to start telling some ghost stories, spooky Ouija board things, and that happened. Of course, I'm full of them with all these things that happened in my house. But then one of my friends, Jeff, tells about this little story about when these other friends of ours in school who were not with us in this group went out to this church that's like in the middle of a field outside of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, this tiny town in the southeastern part of the state. And the church was called St. Killian's. And it was like an original type of, like, one-room type of church, almost like a schoolhouse look to it.
Was that Jack Kevorkian's other name?
Yeah, right, St. Killian. Just the name itself, we were like, what? This is freaky. But the story was, the little legend is that there's a graveyard just to the right of this tiny church, out in the middle of the country, no real houses around, and this tiny graveyard's out there with maybe 20 headstones, and in the middle of the graveyard is a really large statue of the crucifixed Jesus. So the dare, evidently, and whether they were making this up on the spot or not, but the dare was to go out into the middle of the graveyard and touch the toes of Jesus and then run back to the car or whatever, just because it was like this spooky location. And of course, some of the rumors were that Satan worshippers, worshipped in the basement of the church and everything. And so we're all just kind of getting spooked out. And then one of us, I don't remember who it was, said, let's go out there. And it was probably a 25-minute drive, and we were just like, yeah, sure. And we've got these two friends of ours who were freshmen at the time, and they were both younger brothers of two of my good friends, Jeff Mowry and Mark Becker. So Tommy was Mark's younger brother, and then I think it was Eric was Jeff's younger brother, and then we had another friend of ours with us named Greg. We had a pretty big contingent. We pile into Jeff's minivan, this horrible old purple minivan, and we drive out to the space. So we've got 20 minutes at least of just kind of driving through country roads. We're telling even more ghost stories, just spooking the hell out of ourselves. And by the time we turn the road that we know we're supposed to go down, nobody knew where it was other than Jeff, and Jeff was just going through memory. Like, there was no GPS at the time. We didn't even have a map. And so Jeff's like, I think it's down here.
Just follow the screams, right?
Just follow the bonfires of bodies being burned.
Yeah.
And so we pull down this road, and it was like a roller coaster, windy, snake-like road with these old trees with the branches hovering over. It was actually, in the daytime, beautiful, if you're actually driving with the sun out. Yeah. And, of course, this was really late, and so it was just adding to the eeriness. And as we're driving through, we think we're seeing lights out into in the field, and probably just, God forbid, a home, but we're like, whatever, there's lights out there. And so we get up.
This is remote.
Oh, out in the middle
there's no strip malls nearby or anything like that.
Farmland. And as we're going out there, and speaking of farmland, it was late August, so the corn hadn't yet been tilled, if that's what you call it, harvested.
Sure.
And so it was really tall. It was probably almost 7 feet tall. So it was just a wall of corn as we're driving down most of this spooky country lane. And so we finally come up, we see that there's one spotlight aimed on the side of this church. The church was no longer used, and so it was odd enough for a light to be on in this church. And so we see it in the distance, and it looks so scary. Typical one steeple kind of church, white with a dark, brown roof. And we pull up, and the road that we were on had, to the right of it, had a little hill that went up and then plateaued. So it was like a little 4-foot hop up a hill to the plateau that this church was sitting on. So not only was it in front of us, but it was up. It was just so, like hanging over us, this thing. And of course, as we pull up, we see that there is actually a graveyard out there, and there is actually a crucifix statue of Jesus. And we were just freaking out. Like, this is so scary. I don't know if we can do this. And we're trying to pump ourselves out. And Jeff just drives by, like, well, I don't know. We're going to have to make up our minds. We do a little U-turn at the T in the road, and then come back, and Jeff, for whatever reason,
you're casing the joint.
So we get out and we split up. So 4 of us go to the front of the church. Jeff and I decided to go to the side of the church. We had no idea what we were looking for. We were just exploring. There was no end game here. Nobody wanted to go out into the graveyard and touch the toes. So the group of 4 guys go to the front door. I'm not really sure what's happening with them. Jeff and I go around to the side, and we're going to go find the windows to the basement, because that sounds like a great idea. Because apparently that's where the Satan worshippers do whatever they do. And so we do find these windows, and there was no actual glass. It was just like you could reach your hand in. And Jeff's like, reach your hand. And so we're kind of hunching over, looking down. I don't really want to look, but I'm like, this is weird. And Jeff suddenly pops up, stands up straight, and looks out of the graveyard. And I'm like, what's going on? And he goes, I heard something. And he keeps looking out into the graveyard, and I'm like, whatever, man. And so I try to just keep walking. And he goes, no. Do you hear something? I'm like, I don't hear anything. He goes, do you hear Aerosmith? And I'm like, what? I don't hear anything, man. And so we look back at the church, and he's trying to ignore it. And after less than 30 seconds, he pops back up and he looks at the graveyard again, which was technically behind him. He turns around and he looks, and suddenly he's half a second later sprinting to the car. Something scared the hell out of him. And so, of course, everybody else sees this, and we all run to the car. And so we jump into the van. He doesn't pull away. We're just sitting there like, what's going on? What happened? And Jeff's like, I saw a head above a gravestone, and I heard music, and we're like, oh my God, you're totally freaking out, dude. Like, we're kind of poking fun. And we sit in the car, and we're finally like, come on, let's get back out. So we kind of go back to our same spaces. Group of four to the front door, Jeff and I around the back. We're just looking around. We try to go back into the behind, back of the church. I think we were looking for a back door because we were supposed to go in. I don't know. And Jeff once again looks in the graveyard and just books it to the car. And I'm like, all right, something obviously is wrong. So we are all running. We finally get into the van, and he just punches it. Like, not even waiting for us to ask what's wrong. And we're screaming at him as he's driving away. And he's like, I saw somebody in the graveyard, I swear to God. And as we're driving away, headlights turn on from behind this shack, way behind the cemetery. Headlights turn on.
Cultists.
And we're like, oh, wait a minute. And a car that did not look like anything but just some old beater just comes flying out from back of the shed. It's like this dirt road, dirt's flying up, and it's just, spinning out, and it's coming after us. And we are flying down as fast as this purple minivan can go, down winding, up and down roads, cornfields on either side. And we're screaming at each other like, what the hell? And this car's just gaining on us, like not even remotely slowing down. And it gets to the right on our rear end. And Mark is in the back, and he's screaming. He's like, it's unmarked. It's not a police officer. So we're flipping out, and we're going as fast as we can. Finally, little lights, like police lights, come on the dash of the car. And we didn't believe them. We're like, no, they're faking us out. We're devil worshippers. They're going to kill us. And so finally, the car is not, leaving us. And Jeff finally pulls over. And at this point,
you continued for a while on a police chase.
At least a half a mile. We were probably going 55, 60, because these roads were up and down, and we would have been flying like Griswold over these hills, And so we finally pull over, corns on either side of us. We're trapped. This cop gets out of the car. He's wearing uniform. We actually sighed a little bit of a relief. Like, thank God it's the cops.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the guy gets out, and he comes up to the window, and Jeff, gives him the driver's license, whatever, and he asks us, have you guys been drinking? Unbelievably, we hadn't had a drop of alcohol. You would think that's what these kids are doing. So no, and the guy walks back to the car, and as we're looking out the window, we see a guy in full military fatigues with headset, like just armed to the hilt, walk out of the corn. Just walked out of the corn. We were a good half mile down from the church. Walks out of the corn and joins this cop, and we're all in the car like, wait a minute, that's really weird. And then another cop car comes swinging. Yeah, so we just had a dropped call happen right as I was saying this police officer was coming and get us. You're not going to notice with the edit, but somebody's listening in and not wanting us to go to St. Killian's. Already so weird. Military dude coming out of the corn. We've got two cop cars and this guy in full fatigues. And the guy in full fatigues comes up to our car and asks all of us to get out. And we're like, I don't know if we really should. And finally, of course, we just agree. And this guy in fatigues pulls my friend Mark over. Mark's this tall, really good-looking blonde kid, and he just doesn't have a negative bone in his body. Yeah. And he pulls Mark away from everybody. And the other police officer comes up and talks to us, and he believed us that we hadn't been drinking and all this stuff, and he gives the driver's license back, and he's like, so that you were trespassing, and we were like, we told the stories. We'd heard the place was devil worshippers and all these legends. The cop's like, this is why we do these stakeouts, because people come and they vandalize the place, and we're like, shit. And so it was a little bit of a laugh that the rest of us had.
Sure.
Meanwhile, Mark comes back from military investigation. He is just pale-faced, not healthy, and we're like saying goodbye to the police officers, and the police officer ends up giving us freaking trespassing tickets. We're kind of laughing about it. Mark is just stone silent, and we're like, dude, Becker, what did what did the cops say? And he goes, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, what? Come on. And we finally pull it out of him. The cop was grilling him. That he opened up with, did you put a bomb under the front door? And Mark was like, what? We didn't do anything. And he saw, evidently, Mark try to open the front door of the church, which then leads us to really sit back and go, wait a minute. So these guys were watching us, and Jeff and Mowry immediately goes, oh my God, the dude in the graveyard. So it came out that the police officer was sitting in the graveyard wearing headphones, looking over this headstone and watching us walk to the side of the church. And it turns out that, and we asked him this when we were, chatting with the police officer. So I'm kind of jumping ahead, but Jeff asked the police officer, were you listening to Aerosmith? And he said, yeah, I was listening to Aerosmith. So Jeff was dead on. He's like, I knew I heard Aerosmith. So long story short, don't go searching around, rumored to be devil-worshipping churches named St. Killian's, because you will get slapped with about a $400 trespassing ticket.
It's unbelievable that they still give you a fine if you didn't vandalize or anything,
Didn't do anything. Yeah.
Or the lesson is, I guess, go at sunset so you can at least see if there's anybody there before the sun goes down.
Right. But you and I ended up going to the church, remember?
Yes, we did. Yeah. Well, the church was gone by the time.
It was torn down, which I was blown away. I had no idea that the cemetery was still there. And I remember seeing the toes of the statue having been cut off. Like somebody obviously went up, and this was a well-known myth, apparently.
Yeah.
So that's my fantastic story of the week. I've told that story around, I think, every campfire I've ever sat on.
Well, and it's so infinitely entertaining. I think there's something so relatable about, kind of getting in over your head, just trying to have some childhood fun, and things take a turn.
Right. Anyway, we've got a pretty cool special guest here, Karl Pfeiffer. You should be checking out the documentary called Hellier, Hellier, on Amazon Prime. It's a 5-episode documentary series about this really weird story about how these guys get together and react to an email that came in to go investigate some weird alien goblin thing in a cave.
Well, the great thing is, think of if I was in that position, I got an email about this cool story. Okay, that's neat. Maybe I'll go back and forth emailing with the person. Some people might want to write up a blog post about it or do some more research. But here we have Karl, who has 2 seasons of a show that came out of this. It just goes to show how somebody can take something that's interesting and then build on it and then create with it. And I love that about it.
It's the beauty of documentaries in general, really, is that you don't really know the story until it starts to tell itself. And it takes an extreme amount of patience, and not everybody can do that. And obviously, you can just, by talking to Karl, you can tell he's a really level-headed guy. He's been in the supernatural and paranormal world for a long time. He was one of the investigators at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado for, I think he said, like 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, he spent like up to 3 or 4 days a week at this place. Just pretty cool guy, and he's got an excellent documentary out right now, and we're excited for him for the next one. So we're just going to move right in. Here is Karl Pfeiffer of the documentary series Hellier. Scott is in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm in Los Angeles, California. Karl is in Loveland, Colorado. So we're flanking Karl from the west and the east.
We got him surrounded.
Yeah.
That's all it could take to get me here. Like, you guys had to get me on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Karl, I haven't known you more than just a couple of months, but we've crossed paths at the Michigan Paracon very lightly, and we got to chat a bit more just recently out in Menominee, Wisconsin at the Paranomicon. Again, these paranormal conferences and any kind of writing or creative conference are really so invaluable to go to. You can make new connections and friendships, like how Karl and I know each other now. But Karl is a filmmaker, photographer, and paranormal enthusiast, hence he's here. After earning a degree in creative writing and putting out 2 books, he shifted gears into photography before shifting his focus again to documentary video production. His first longer-form video project was a web series called Spirits of the Stanley, which was followed by his breakout project, the documentary series Hellier, which is available now out on Amazon Prime. And he's currently in the process of editing season 2, which is set to release November 29th. And you could definitely go to hellier.tv for all the info you might want to look into.
All right. So, Karl, why don't you tell us a little bit of obviously your background and how you got started, which, Scott covered a little bit in the bio, but I like to come from this angle of voice. When I'm working with my writers, I bring up this little journaling exercise that I make them do called voice pressure points, where they just look back on their life and consider the moments, whether it was last week or 25 years ago, that changed their perspective on the world, either positively or negatively. So where you're concerned, was there something that occurred in your childhood that pushed you toward looking at the supernatural, paranormal, something spooky, scary, a movie you saw? Do you remember a moment that really changed your perspective, and that's what has kind of honed your take as a creative?
Man, just jumping right into it. I love it. The first life-changing moment in the paranormal and creative field. I'm a tricky one because it's similar. It's interesting to the question that all paranormal enthusiasts and researchers get, which is kind of like, well, what was your first experience? How did you get into this stuff? And I think a lot of paranormal people have that kind of background where they're either just super fascinated by it, or they have some sort of like life-altering experience and they're on a quest for answers. For me, I've always just been super passionate about it. The experiences I've had in that regard have always been relatively rare. And so for me, it was always kind of like creative oriented from the get-go. I consumed a lot of pop culture in the 90s growing up as a kid that was oriented around the supernatural, and it was very inspiring to me. I think the biggest one I always point toward, I think I was like 5 maybe, living out in Maryland where I was born, and my aunt and uncle sent a postcard from Universal Studios with the Ghostbusters like stage play thing that they did there.
Nice.
Yeah. And like little 5-year-old me was like, what is this? This looks awesome. I need to know everything about this. Because there's, a couple ghosts and the Zools and stuff, and they're blasting them, and it seemed great. So my folks were just like, well, it's time we introduce you to Ghostbusters then. So they rented it from the library because, 90s kids. So we rented it from the library and we watched it, and I was super hooked after that. I was like, ghosts, anything, paranormal, anything. I want to do this in real life. This is like a documentary to me, even though it's a comedy movie, but I took it very seriously. And I think that combined with like a love of like Batman as a kid too, like the Tim Burton Batmans, adding a little bit of like dark and creepiness, kind of just like set the ball rolling for me, that after that, I just wanted to consume everything that was like kind of horror, supernatural, dark, spooky. And whether it was because ghosts kind of kicked that off, or whether it was because like unsolved mysteries and sightings and the X-Files and stuff were kind of big in the 90s. I always had a kind of a drive to go the practical direction with it too, and try to find the stuff in the real world if it did exist and if that was possible.
See, that is so interesting to me, and sorry to cut you off, Karl.
Oh, no.
I love the fact that, like, I watched Ghostbusters when I was a kid, but I didn't have the same reaction. I just thought it was fun. Like most kids were like, oh, this is just fun. So it's just, and it's interesting because I don't know the answer to it, and I don't know if anybody does, why people gravitate towards certain things. There's something that's just inherent inside of us that we like this more than something else. Why does a boy like to play with a He-Man guy compared to a girl? Like, it's just weird to me that we may have had a lot of the same experiences, and yet my voice went off in a different direction as well. Were your parents also kind of into this stuff? Was there a little bit of an influence there?
Not a bit.
Really?
That's why I think about this stuff all the time too, because I'm actually a twin. So I grew up side by side with my brother, Glenn, and I kind of led the charge with the stuff that interested me. So if we were playing pretend, it was always Batman, because like I had that decision, or Ghostbusters, and he kind of lumped onto that. But he never really carried that kind of like passion for the creepy stuff that I did.
Wild.
So that makes me think about it even more. Like what aspect was it that like a little toddler or a little tyke, has this interest in these things, when everyone else in my little community around me, my parents, my twin brother, my younger brother, no one's really into the stuff that I am too. Yet that spoke to me.
Because you're ready to hear like, well, my dad was, owned a mortuary.
Right. Yeah, my parents were super into this stuff. I mean, I know that people go a different way from their parents all the time, but it wasn't even like that, like rejecting, like, I don't even know what the opposite of ghost is. I would like reject a parental belief and like, I'm going to take up ghosts to get back at you guys.
I'll show you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I remember, not to make this about me, but I do remember kindergarten. You know, you go through season after season of making crafts, because that's basically all you're doing. You're just biding time and playing with construction paper as a little kid. And eventually October comes around and it's all Halloween crafts. And I'm like, I'm sold. I did nothing but draw pictures of haunted houses the rest of my kindergarten year. And I remember my teacher being like, yeah, he's really into the haunted houses. But it is wild. Like, yeah, why did that strike a chord with me? And that's obviously something that somehow, even though I wasn't super into it from that moment forward, it was just something inside that was intriguing to me. And then it really burst out of me after I got out of high school.
There's a little bit of level of like psychological therapy that comes into this, idea of our podcast being titled Fantastic Story Society, because everybody thinks that there are different types of fantastic stories. Like, obviously we're focused on some of the more dark related phenomena, but there are fascinating stories in any field. But, when I look at myself, I had 3 older sisters. I was the youngest of 4. My mom was always home. So I had a very strong female presence in the house all the time. And all my sisters were, to say they were opinionated is an understatement.
Well,
so
they might have
I had this level of
that.
wanting to receive approval. And so had I gone down this level of, wild passion over some darker things like Ghostbusters and just the darker side of things, my sister would have been like, you're weird. So I didn't. So were you and your brother, Karl, were you only children, or did you have brothers and sisters?
I had a younger brother. He's 3 years younger than me, growing up with us. So we were all 3 pretty inseparable in that regard. But so there wasn't really anyone older than me as a kid that I was like trying to like impress ever. But I do have in my background this kind of like weird people pleaser history with me. And so it's kind of weird in that regard too. I don't know if it's because my parents were just encouraging enough to be like, yep, whatever you're into, go be into that. That's fine. As long as it's not like drugs and guns, whatever. But like, I don't know. In every other aspect of my life, like I'm very concerned about like making sure that everyone is happy. But if that means going down this like creepier path and like exploring darker subjects or the paranormal or the occult, and if anybody says like, no, I don't think you should do that, like I'd be pretty disappointed in you. I'd say, well, too bad. So it's weird, it's got that like serious connection with me that I kind of like disregard some of the other parts of my nature in favor of that, even though there wasn't a whole lot of influence from it.
And I'm curious because, as we just read in the bio, you have a degree in creative writing. I guess looking back at it now, I don't know if you've looked back at what you wrote in college, but does that still seem like your voice, or how have you evolved since then, and what the type of content was you were writing about in college?
It's definitely all the same sandbox. I think for me, a lot of the place, not that this is the question, but I draw a lot of inspiration from the media and the art that I'm consuming at the time. And I sort of take it the next step further, where like me consuming something that I love, it's not enough just to like continue to engage with it, but also then to try to like reproduce, like to create something myself then that's in a similar space that other people can engage with. It's sort of taking that step further. And so writing, like I was a big reader all through my childhood, and getting into college, like I was really into writing and the idea of like writing novels and stuff. So I wrote 2 books. One of them was a novel and one was kind of short stories. Most of that over my time in college. And the space, it's been kind of a tough life in this regard, because I am only interested in kind of a few things in the world. And it's typically like the dark and creepy and the supernatural, and everything else is kind of irrelevant. So to be creative in those kinds of spaces, it's typically all the same sandbox. So my first novel was about kind of the horror space, the supernatural space. There's Jungian kind of philosophy and mysticism tied into it. And it's weird to see those same themes kind of coming up now in some of my work. Weird in the way that I'm not really trying to intentionally bring them into it sometimes, but certainly the same kind of space thematically and topically now.
You at least chose a genre that's pretty popular. It's not like you chose, a specific 16th century romance and family drama genre to focus in. That would have made it a little bit harder to actually make a career out of what you're doing. But you have, and that's kind of the segue I'm trying to make here in terms of what was the first instance. You get out of college, you wanted to do something within this field or genre or study of success. What was that first instance of, this might actually work? Because it's not easy making a living in any creative field, much less one when you have to put money up to make something and then hopefully you get it back,
Yeah, I keep drawing these parallels that I haven't really thought of before, but it's very similar to the paranormal experiences where it's so gradual that you almost can't point to any single moment that was like a first impressive moment. Like the independent success, like or success in the independent space is a complicated one. There was the little bit of backstory is that I was actually cast for a brief time in 2009 when I was in college on Ghost Hunters Academy, which was like one of the Ghost Hunter spin-off competition shows.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
It was fine. I don't know. They were trying to do new things with the paranormal space. I get that. But I was on 6 episodes of that and 1 episode of Ghost Hunters International, and never really got the call back from the producers after all that. So I went back to college, but it gave me that first kind of like taste of it. Ironically, it wasn't really a success thing. So it wasn't anything I was doing other than just like being myself, and people wanted to see that on TV from the production world until they didn't, I guess. But it gave me kind of, it gave me the idea that like it was possible, that I could like go live a life like that where I'm having fun doing this job. I'm looking for ghosts. I'm making money from it. And it wasn't a very complex process to get there. So I think that sort of added some naivety into my whole, like, I can totally reach my dreams. I can do this ghost hunting stuff for sure. And then that kind of fizzled, and I go back to college, and the next few years and then trying to write was a whole lot of like, why is nothing really going anywhere? And it's been even until now of just like that slow crawl of just like, this is really hard. And it feels like the universe gave me this one little push and like lit up like my fantasy life. And then the whole next 10 years has just been like nothing but just like the slow crawl up the mountain. The things that I learned most was when I put out my first book, because I was doing it independently and I was like self-publishing. It was all the rage back then. I was like, I'm going to do it too. Is a TV show fan base is not inherently a reading fan base. And so I learned that kind of the hard way. It was like, it's easy to turn on TV and everyone's like, oh, Karl, we liked him from the show. Like, what's he working on? It's a lot harder to try to get a book in their hands and get them to crack that book and enjoy it.
Okay.
There's plenty that did, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one, and from there, even into the photography, and what I've learned now successfully from Hellier is marketing is one of the biggest elements, and you can be good at every part of the rest of the process. But if you're not good at marketing and getting that word out there, it's a tough slog. And that took me like 7 years to learn that.
Yeah. I always tell writers that you could have written The Great Gatsby, but if no one knows it exists, then who cares? Yeah. Literally, there's like if the tree falls in the forest kind of thing. So yeah, no, marketing is huge. So let's actually, Scott, I mean, oh God, I have so many questions because I want to get
there's so much to get into on this.
Yeah, I want to get into the Stanley and that documentary, and I'm just fascinated by the Stanley for my own personal reasons. Obvious, I'm a fan of ghosts, but my irony is that I don't actually want to go to the Stanley. And so I'm just like, I want to hear other people's experiences, so I'd love to hear some of your stories from there. But Scott, why don't we get into Hellier? Let's just talk about Hellier, dive into that, and then we can kind of move back and forth in time.
So you had that experience, Ghost Hunters International, Ghost Hunters Academy. Did you learn any lessons from being on set, observing how things come together that you were able to then bring to your future productions, including Hellier?
It's an interesting question framed that way, because there was definitely a lot that I learned at that time at life, right? So I dabbled in video production in like middle school and high school. I was really into it, but it sort of faded. I don't know if I just never really took that like career path very seriously or just what, but it maybe it was just less of something that I could do at home by myself, like writing was, whatever it was. So when I was on set for Academy for 2 months, a I was taking everything in, but I never really was looking at it too much with that sort of eye of like, I could do this, or I'm learning from this. I wasn't really looking at the camera guys and going like, oh, maybe it's a possibility for me to be one of those guys instead of being on screen. But what did start talking to me during it was I started to get more into photography. At that point, I mean, DSLRs were really starting to like hit the consumer market a little bit more. And because this was, 10 years ago, now they're a dime a dozen and they're everywhere. But that was kind of the start of it. And there was a lot of enthusiasm around the crew for those kinds of cameras, and even the sound guys on B-roll days would just take their camera to the location and just do like cool HDR photographs and stuff. And they were showing me pictures in our downtime, because there's so much downtime on the set, that I started to get really into it from that. So that was kind of the contagious sort of pushing me towards photography in a weird way at that point. But it also taught me a lot about just kind of ghost hunting TV in general. There was nothing faked on our show, and for better or for worse, not saying that faked is good by any stretch. That's a different conversation. But if you watch the first season of Ghost Hunters Academy, I don't know, maybe it could use some fakery. Like there's nothing that happens from the paranormal for like 6 episodes.
It's too real.
It's too real. It's pretty quiet. I don't know if the ghost didn't like all the drama or what, but it's very quiet. But that said, I walked away from the experience like integrity intact. I think that being honest in the paranormal world is imperative. But when I got home, I was suddenly, because I grew up like a Ghost Hunters fanboy, and I was like, oh, you got to do it this way, and there's no other way, and like they're the legit ones. And I got home and I just didn't care anymore. I like turned on Paranormal State and watched a whole season of that. I was like, it's like a mini horror movie every week. I don't care if it's real or fake. Like it's just TV. And for whatever reason, that just totally disappeared. Now, in my creative world, that's, because of the ghost hunting background, it's still, honesty is very important to me. But it was a really interesting sort of process being on the other side of that and walking away from it, not really caring about that as much as a viewer for whatever reason. So kind of a weird takeaway.
I think that comes across the just keeping the integrity intact is something that comes across in Hellier. And this might be a somewhat awkward thing to bring up, but just looking at, I bring it up because I know you've talked about it before, so you're capable, and this is not an attack at all. But your reviews are so split. People either love it or hate it. Yeah. And I think a lot of the negative might be people that are expecting, hey, I want somebody to be decapitated by the end or something like that. But you really just you cover it kind of professionally, like a journalist even.
Yeah, it's the reviews have been really fascinating. And as a creative person that's making 80% of it myself, who wants to make everyone happy, like bad reviews are always like hard to read. They really like bend me out of shape, and I have arguments in my head for the next 3 hours and split hairs over stuff. But that space, it's interesting to see, with distance now. It's really fascinating to see the way that people took it. And a lot of it was, we sort of set it up ourselves for this. And I always have to remind myself that when I just get in people pleaser mode. But at the end of the day, the first thing that we wanted to do was to make a project that was a project that we wanted to see. It's like TV is trying to appease the widest possible audience so that they can get the most eyeballs on it to watch their commercials and make them money. So for us, we were like, we're sick of this cookie cutter stuff. Everyone's trying to do the same formulaic ghost show. Let's do a show that we want to see. And what I wanted to see was something high concept, something intelligent, something artsy, and something cinematic. And so we made it knowing that that's not going to appeal to everyone. Some people are going to think that it's too artsy or too smart or too boring or too talky, and so that's something to remember for the polarity. But it's also, we set out to do something because, I mean, everything's so accessible at this point now. And I love consuming scripted, fictionalized television. So like TV dramas and movies. And the aesthetic of a lot of those is so, I mean, it's that cinema aesthetic, like a heavy color grade. Maybe it's shot in anamorphic, right? Like everything's very stylized right now in this new golden age of TV. And I was like, how cool would it be to bring that to the documentary world? I know that that's it's a premise that's interesting right off the bat, because documentary is supposed to feel real. It's real life. So the idea of bringing a cinematic vibe to a documentary space is a little counterintuitive for most people, I think, especially if you're pitching it to somebody. But it's a space that I wanted to play in, especially when it comes to the paranormal, because the paranormal is already so up in the air about like whether people believe that it exists, whether it doesn't exist, whether the ghost hunting shows are real, whether some of them are fake. So to play in that same kind of space where you make something look like it's not real, but it's all totally real, is a place where we can manipulate a lot of people's expectations. And I think that by doing that, it's very like literary criticism, deconstruction. Like if you can kind of knock them onto their back foot, they're more open to like having their viewpoints changed, right? So there's that sort of like high concept element. And I think that that messes with people because some people think, oh, it's a fake, like it's a mockumentary, it's not real. These people are horrible actors. Oh, I spent all this time on this and they didn't even pull a goblin out. Like what's going on? You know, so
are those some of the reviews?
I mean, I'm literally wearing a shirt right now that was like one of our joke rap presents from Greg at the end of season 2. Greg is featured. He's the main character of the documentary. And it says, it's like an Amazon review and it has the 5 stars and only one of them is filled and it says no goblins. I think a lot of people, like there's so much buildup. There's a goblin on the poster and it looks so high budget. Like whether they, by the end of it, think that it's fake still or not, like I think everyone was expecting this big payoff from like all this sort of like hype that was before they watched it, from the reviews and the hype inside the documentary that felt like it was building to something. And I think that just it was a lot of reinforcement that maybe people forget that it was real life. And like real life, no one's dragging goblins out on camera because it just doesn't work that way, you know? Yeah. Your camera will break before a goblin allows itself, I think, to come out of a cave. But
so I definitely want to get into the origin of this all for anybody listening that hasn't seen it yet. But I just, since we're talking about reviews, I'm curious because as writers, as creators, we're constantly getting notes. And sometimes, as you were talking about, a bad review or a harsh note is difficult. It hits your soul and leaves a little bit of a bruise. But if you're really good and can ideally, if those, even if it's harsh, if you can find truth in it that can help you, I'm just out of curiosity and not to encourage bad reviews, but did you see any negative or even middling review on Amazon or elsewhere or in person that you thought, you know what, they actually have a little bit of a point and I'm going to apply a lesson from this for season 2?
Yeah, it's part of the hardest process as like, especially being like such a small team working on this. And I'm the only one on like the camera side and the post-production side, is I don't get a lot of that kind of critical feedback. Like we have our little test screeners and stuff amongst like friends, but it is tough to get good, honest feedback. And it is hard to try to then separate like who's going to be in a troll, because the paranormal space, especially in the internet, like there's plenty of trolls. And
the non-mythical kind.
Exactly. We can't find goblins, but we found some trolls.
Yeah, no
the
goblins
irony is upon us. But separating those two things is difficult. So at the end of the day, I almost just have to like spend less time like reading for accuracy, you know, like reading reviews saying like which element of this should I pay attention to, because that could drive a creative crazy. But I think after enough time, once the noise kind of settles down, you kind of, there's stuff that you remember more than other things. There's stuff that your gut kind of like knows is true. And I think that those are kind of the things that, I think it's the stuff that stays with you from some of those reviews that you kind of take to heart. And then it's the balancing act of just kind of like, well, what did we set out to do? Did it fail in that regard? Do we make it better in that regard? Like, what's the heart of this process? So a lot of people like, it's too slow, there's too much talking. And in a lot of ways, like it's a valid point because it's supposed to be a high concept, slow burn project. So we're going to have a lot of that. But it was also like 4 days in a town that spread out over to 4 episodes. And we needed to present the nuance, the subtle things that happen. And we needed to spend time in there. But we don't need to do that for the whole next season when we're covering 2 years, you know? So there was a lot of stuff that I think was less like a conscious decision of, oh, we're not going to do this thing as much as we did in season 1, so much as kind of like a natural progression and some kind of conscious awareness that things were changing. That's like, okay, the pace is going to speed up a little bit. We're not going to try to like dumb it down, but if anyone was kind of struggling with some of the concepts, like we're going to make sure that we're really clear because things are going to get only more complicated. That sort of thing. You kind of pick up on the echoes.
Did you know that there was going to be a second season immediately, like after shooting the first?
It felt like it. I think because the first season, I mean, we basically went out for like a week and a half and shot the first season. We didn't know what it was going to be. So when we went out there, I was like, part of the backstory on the project was that after the web series I did, the Stanley, dried up and the Stanley got rid of their ghost program, that same team that worked on that, were trying to get a TV show off the ground. And we were talking about it for like a year and a half. This was before the Travel Channel blew up, like a couple months after we missed the boat. But we spent so much time like talking to this production company about like how I wanted it to look, what we wanted the concept to be, you know, like basically what Hellier wound up being was what we wanted to make for a ghost hunting show. And it was driving me so crazy that we were talking about it so much and I wanted to shoot it already that by the time that our show was drying up, I just said, you know what, I'm going to stop waiting for the money and waiting for something to happen. And I called Greg and I said, let's just do this thing. Let's just go. You've got this crazy backstory on this thing. Let's just like go shoot it. And maybe it'll be a sizzle reel. Maybe it'll be an hour-long documentary or a mini doc or the start of a season. But let's go down to this town, let's shoot the backstory, and let's see what happens. And it turned into 5 episodes. So it was really just kind of a week and a half, like the first dabbling in this case to see if there was anything there. And as soon as there was, it started to feel like, okay, we have more questions, we have more avenues, we have more leads. Maybe there's a season 2 here. And season 2 showed up.
And let's talk a little bit about the cast, because Greg and Dana are such incredible people. And also you had some off camera, but vocally heard words of wisdom from Mr. John Tenney, who, if people don't know, he's an exceptional researcher and storyteller as well. So if you could talk a little bit about who was in your not just your cast, but your creative team.
The way it developed back at the Stanley, one of my best friends up there, Connor Randall, was working with me, and he was a ghost hunter up at the hotel, and he's got kind of an audio background. And at the time, I also had a friend that was a photographer and a videographer, and he was starting to get some work as a PA and a second AC, and started working the Denver film scene, working his way up the ladder. But I knew that he was very talented and had a good eye and was really passionate about this stuff. So when it got to the point, well, I'm backing up, then there's Greg and Dana, who are on camera. They're kind of the 2 main characters. They're a husband and wife couple who run the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. So they have a bunch of haunted and historic artifacts and a beautiful kind of Victorian tent display that they take it around the country and do lectures and show people these artifacts. And Greg had a weird story. He has many weird stories, but one in particular I heard on a podcast was about these weird creatures in Kentucky terrorizing a family, and it was a big cliffhanger, and that's what became Hellier. Greg and Dana are at the core of that. So when I decided that I wanted to go out and do this project, I basically called up Connor because I was like, just need somebody else on camera if we need it, need somebody to help me with gear. He can just kind of be my everything man. And then I'll grab my friend Rashad if his schedule is available, and he can be our camera guy and shoot the whole thing, and we can just go do an investigation and see what happens. It's amazing that it even fell together because we just grabbed the equipment we had between Rashad and some friends of mine that run like a very small media company. So they had some like LED lights and stuff like that.
Good friend to have.
Yeah. Exactly. They're the important ones. So like it was nothing fancy. It's not like having like friends in LA that you're like, oh, can I, borrow your Alexa Mini and your, Sky panels? Like it was a bunch of like 5D Mark IIIs and, a couple like 1 foot by 1 foot LED lights. And we just like threw it in the back of the car nicely and drove out there. And like all 5 of us like had never met each other before. I was kind of the hub of everything, but like Rashad didn't know Connor, neither of them had properly met the Newkirks, and here we are crashing on their living room. So it was very.
But that's kind of part of the story. Like that's kind of part of the fun of the documentary and how it starts in some ways. I mean, obviously you guys get into the adventure pretty quickly, but you can see that. Like when I was watching, I think that's why I liked the documentary so much, and why I was okay with. Well, I don't want to give away the ending for people who haven't watched, but it was the relationships. It was that you guys formed a friendship, and you could see it happening as you were, because you'd already known each other, but it was really like, okay, now you guys are becoming buddies, and through these pretty spooky experiences you were having.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, some of the stuff I think about when I think back on watching this miniseries is you guys hanging out at the hotel after a night of talking to townspeople and whatnot. And that kind of like the downtime in between the investigation it feels like you're part of the team. I like that a lot.
It's cool to hear that sort of feedback too, because most of the time when I get like 10 minutes to talk about the project with people, like they're asking me questions about the phenomena and the experiences and all that, right? I forget about the people element of the story and how much like people see of that process behind the scenes, which in a doc like this is in front of the scenes too. It was very important for me from the get-go. I've said this, it's my worst kept secret, but like the most important thing in any story or paranormal television, if we're going so specific, is characters. You know, I've watched paranormal TV for 15 years, and it's hilarious to me to watch these production companies and these networks buy these shows that launch right into the ghosts and they're ghost hunting, and then they get canceled after 6 episodes, and everyone's super confused, and they're like, we had such a cool premise. Why are we not as big as Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures? Even Ghost Hunters did it, where they would have a spin-off show and it wouldn't be getting the same kind of numbers as the original show, and everyone was confused. But if you go back and you watch those original shows, they spend so much time getting to know the characters on screen and showing that to the audience at home before they find their formula of the paranormal part, that everyone just loves them as a family. You know, it's like you tune in each week to see what your friends are doing on TV.
I think that's absolutely the reason Ghost Adventures is still on the air. Yeah. Because all those guys are so ridiculous that you really, the main reason I'm tuning in is just to see Aaron get scared.
Yeah. And you like know who he is. Right. And like you understand, like, you know, it's why you can't just throw 3 normal people into the exact same formula, where the first thing that happens is they walk up to a house and go, this is the house where the demons came and killed the people. And everyone's just like rolling their eyes. But if you instead start with just like, here's who this person is, and here's why they're interesting, and like, here's why they're nice, and like, here's why you can trust them in 4 episodes when they start having visions of really obscure stuff, and you're probably not going to believe, you know, like, it's character is so important, and I think it's really easy to miss. So that's why I tried to spend time on it when I started Hellier, is because I knew like people need to get to know the people in this project.
Maybe I have a longer attention span than an average audience now, but I like to take the time to get to know what's going on, to set the stage. I love the M. Night one with Bruce Willis, the superhero. That's basically all just a first act. Unbreakable. Yeah. So many people hated that one because it was just a first act. The entire film was a first act. I don't know. I loved setting the stage and getting to know the characters to that degree.
Throwing the characters aside, the Hellier phenomena. Let's just, so everybody's listening, they're probably like, what the heck is it? You know, we at least give them a little bit.
So the elevator pitch is, back in 2012, my friend Greg Newkirk, still pretty young, he was running like a popular blog website, and he was kind of an ex-ghost hunter from his high school years. He gets this email from a guy in rural Kentucky. His name is David Christie, who says these weird creatures are coming out of a mine shaft on the back of his property and terrorizing his family by night. Greg is kind of like, okay, thanks for letting me know. The dude says that he wants help with it. He says that Greg can come down and film it or whatever, but he wants him to basically blow up the mine and stop this problem from happening. He and Greg go back and forth for a couple of weeks about it. Greg's asking for more evidence. The guy sends him pictures of these weird 3-toed footprints and blurry pictures of the creatures themselves in true paranormal fashion. And and pretty much by the time Greg is convinced and wants to go down and check it out, the dude left his house, moved his family out, and deleted his email address and disappears. That's the initial premise. It gets weirder from there. I mean, there's cryptic figures that Greg's never met that are behind the scenes, putting people in touch and emailing him. And then the town itself is super strange kind of activity going on. It's very much up in the sticks in rural Kentucky. And it's just kind of just this deluge of high strangeness that now at this point links to Mothman and the occult and UFOs and creature sightings and Bigfoot. And it's really just a story that's blossomed and gotten strange in subtle ways, but
well, the number of coincidences are crazy. And, you know, the moment you guys share on the front porch where you're doing the, you know, one of your investigators has the headphones on and you guys are just chatting and he's kind of responding to the conversation. Just even little moments like that. I'm like, all right, you can't fake that. That's pretty cool.
It's kind of what's fun about it, too, is there's a lot of stuff, even in season 2, that gets so convoluted and so complicated that just like the imagination to fake something like this would be so unnecessarily complex that it would be so easy to tell a different story in a much simpler way if you were like choosing the fake stuff than what it's becoming.
Something I'm fascinated by is guys go down there, very small footprint, very small team. You're able to do this, even though it's a small town, you're able to do this kind of quietly. But now it's out there. Hellier is the name of the town, so it's not like you're hiding the location. I'd imagine it'd be tougher to keep a low profile the next time around. And then also, how much have you heard directly from people of Hellier, either with maybe new leads or maybe with anger of how their town was portrayed?
It was kind of a roller coaster for sure, because I mean, a lot of people in those kind of rural areas of Kentucky, like a lot of them just want to be left alone. There's not a lot of like law that gets out there that stays towards more of the smaller cities in the area. And it's pretty much just like, these communities kind of run themselves. Everyone knows each other. Everyone keeps to themselves, like they're doing their own thing, whatever. So when we first dropped the teasers for Hellier, we didn't even release the name until about 2 weeks before it aired with the final trailer, because before this, Greg had kept a number of elements of the case a secret from the get-go, because as he published it, he wanted to kind of maintain the integrity of the case if he ever got more information. So names like the name of the town, he never released. And it was very stressful for him when the first season came out, because it was a lot of that secret information was literally in the name of it. So it was interesting, though, because we put out 2 teasers without the title, just ahead of things that were all cryptic and mysterious. And at some point, someone from the area recognized the gas station in the trailer and said, like, oh, that's the Jiffy Stop, right outside of Hellier in Maribone. And like, the trailer starts to go viral in that town. And a lot of those people are like, man, if there's some, stupid person going through our property looking for goblins, like I will shoot them and I will sue you guys for like inspiring people to do that. And this is like a week before we release. So we're like terrified. I mean, the documentary world, it's crazy when you start to look at it, because there's real people and there's real places and you're telling probably real stories. It gets very complicated in the legal gray area of like, what can you film, and like, how many release forms do you need signed, and like, where can you film people without blurring their face, and where do you film people if you have to blur their face. And we're, like, we shot this thing. Season 1 didn't cost us more than $2,500 out of pocket, and we're over here like getting threats of lawsuits a week before we air, and we're just like, we don't have a legal team, like if somebody wanted to take us to court, even if we were in the right, we're not in like a situation for, so it got scary and complicated really fast. At that point, a week out, then we're like trying to censor everything. So if it seems like there's a lot of like unnecessary censorship in the first season, it's because we were so freaked out that we were going to get sued in the 11th hour. Luckily, though, it aired and everyone kind of understood, like they kind of relaxed, because they were like, oh, Hellier itself is like the setting, but it's kind of tangential. Like it's not really about the town. It's about the town, but it's also more about that one person's story. And we weren't taking advantage of anyone in the area. I think everyone's very concerned in areas like that of like being presented poorly. Everyone laughs at it or whatever.
Sure.
And we went in with a lot of respect, because we're like, it's, we're not going to be like, oh, look at these people dumb believing in goblins up here in this holler. We're like, no, like, we want to hear your stories and we believe you. And we think that there's a lot of stuff that's been unexplored in these areas. And we have a lot of respect for all that. And I think once they saw that, everyone was like, oh, okay, this is all right. And things quieted down. And a lot of people, I mean, there's some people that are still just trolls, but a lot of people said like, thank you for presenting it in a good light. We got tons of emails from people about their own stories or about the local legends of the areas that they heard from their grandparents.
Oh, that's perfect.
It's great. Season 1 comes out in the middle of season 2 chronologically. So what we get from putting it out there into the world, what people are telling us, what our relationship with that town is or isn't like as we move forward in the second season is very much kind of a plot point as you go through the second season.
Oh, that's going to be neat to see.
Interesting. Right. So you're saying season 2 is kind of the before, middle, and after.
It is. Yeah. We took some time once we had most of it edited into about 5 episodes. We were trying to figure out what to do with it. Do we put it out ourselves? Do we talk to a production company or a network directly? Do we try to get this on TV and picked up as an acquisition? That took about a year of trying to like figure out what we wanted to do with it and talking to enough people who wanted to make it the Curse of Goblin Island and appeal to the lowest common denominator. That inspired
I
us.
like Curse of Oak Island.
It's entertaining. It's just to take something like Hellier and just like make like every episode just like
Right.
like going to find them goblins in a cave, you know, and stripping out like synchronicity and stripping out like all the talking head stuff and
Right.
you know, like trying to make it just an adventure narrative would kind of like lose a lot of the surprise that we found in the story. We just wound up putting it out ourselves at that point, but that had been like a year and a half of stuff with the case still happening and developing. So the narrative of season 2 is a mess. It plays well, but if you start paying attention to the dates in season 2, like it jumps all over the place, but it very much happens before, during, and after the release of season 1.
And you're in the middle of editing this thing right now.
Yeah, I am. I'm deep in the edit bay. We just finished shooting about 2.5 weeks ago or so.
Wow.
So I'm doing the final cut, the final couple episodes now. It's looking like it's going to be, with my editing, who knows how it'll finally end up, but I'm shooting right now for 10 episodes. So it's actually going to be twice as many episodes as season 1.
Holy cow.
And we're working on the back, probably the back half now at this point. My release date is a little bold, but I think we can do it. So it's going up on Amazon Prime exclusively on Black Friday, and then for free everywhere else in 2 weeks after that.
You can do it.
Yeah.
I believe in you.
I believe in me too. I'm optimistic.
Well, by now
Deadlines are
you've
good.
captured a bunch of goblins and enslaved them at edit bays, and they're all doing your work for you. And
It helps a lot. That was a definite influence on accelerating the timeline.
What kind of near spoiler can you give us?
The big reveal in the trailer is that there are new emails.
From Christy?
I'm not going to say from who,
Uh-oh.
because that's
Okay.
that's a big mystery there. But there are new emails. So the case, due to those emails, the case takes a big step forward, backward, side to side. However, there's all this new information now that's influencing the case as well. And then there's all the information that we've dug up, continuing to follow the threads. So I can say that I don't think there's anybody out there that will watch this season and go, that's pretty much what I expected. I think
Okay.
that's great.
totally unexpected. I think the avenue we go down with the case will be surprising. I mean, we're basically spending most of our time like following up on threads and following the leads. That first episode, season 1 story is very much the core of this project. We didn't want to make it just like, let's go have adventures up in caves the whole way up the Appalachians and find new monsters each week. Like, we wanted to keep that Hellier story the core of it.
Does the Mothman become one of your investigators?
Yeah. Yep. He's
That's
he's
it.
credited. Mm-hmm.
That's the big spoiler.
He
Sorry,
demanded a
everybody.
pretty big paycheck, but we thought it was worth it.
It was worth it. Yeah.
The whole Mothman conspiracy, I don't even know if you can call it a conspiracy anymore. It's just all those things are just wild. And I love all the little things that come into play with the first season of Hellier that year. The coincidences are matching up with some of these weird coincidences from the Mothman story. And that's really what brought me in. I'm like, all right, what's going on? Because obviously something is going on, whether it's paranormal or just it's weird. Weird is still weird, you know? So congratulations, you know, for finishing the first one, obviously, and moving into the second season. It's an accomplishment regardless of how well the thing does. And hopefully you can, you know, remind yourself of that, because it's a ton of work.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's cool to like watch my progression as a filmmaker grow through this project. And it's really fun to be able to like watch, at least, I mean, maybe I'm the only one who can see it, but to watch myself kind of evolve as a filmmaker throughout it is really rewarding.
I don't know. That's amazing, man. Especially because you did this so completely independently on your own. As you mentioned, you weren't going through a network or even a Kickstarter or anything like that. You just did it on your own. The first season releases on Amazon, and let's talk about what that was like for you. I mean, do you monitor numbers, or what's it like after you've put it out there in the world, and this thing that was so intimate and only on your computer and in your heart for the longest time is now just out there for total strangers to perceive however they want to? Are you watching view counts go up? And at any point, does Amazon themselves come out, have any contact with you?
I think we started to get excited when the trailer numbers really started to spread. And I mean, viral is such a misleading word. Like, we're not getting like millions of views on anything, but to have like a small little indie project after doing Spirits of the Stanley, which has only racked up just like a couple thousand views, like it's not a hot commodity. And I'm used to my projects that like they look cool, but I'm used to nothing going super far. So to start racking up numbers on the trailer was really exciting. And then when we put it out there, I mean, a lot of it harkens back to like Greg and Dana's SEO that they have on their website and their media marketing skills, that we sent out press kits to people and we shot high. Like, we looked at this project, and when people like Greg and Dana say like, Karl, this looks amazing, this looks like a really high budget project and doesn't look like something that we shot for $2,500, there's no reason why we shouldn't shoot for the top and say, hey, here's a project. Like, no one needs to know how much we shot it for yet. Are you intrigued? Or can you write something up about it for us, etc.? And that got the hype machine going. Syfy Wire was writing about it. Bloody Disgusting was writing about it. The trailer looked good enough that it got people's interest. And so that hype before it came out made it like a pretty big hit when it first came out. It was racking up like tens of thousands of views on YouTube, just hourly, just throughout the hours and of the first couple days of release. And that was exciting.
Wow. Yeah.
So you're like watching those, and it was kind of a slow progression backwards for me, because at first you're watching everything, and I'm even reading like YouTube comments, and that only lasted about a day on YouTube before I was like, okay, I can't read YouTube comments anymore because they stress me out now.
Yeah.
And I made it about like 5 days on Twitter, searching the hashtag, because of course most people are like into it when they first start watching it, and the people that are like going to be less satisfied start trickling in more so. So eventually the Twitter hashtag got a little too stressful. People like, what? This is stupid. This is really dumb. I didn't find any goblins in it. I'm like, oh, now I'm really sad because someone didn't like my work. And eventually it just kind of like was me reading Greg's liked tweets, and he just became my filter because he would just like every tweet that was positive. So
That's cool.
And then after about a week, I'm just exhausted of people's opinions, and even people that say that they love it just kind of like slides off your back, and it doesn't. That's where it's nice to meet people at events, because at a certain point, the internet, even like positive feedback, just kind of like gets muted. So
Totally.
I think that's kind of, you hear all the people that didn't like it, and the people that loved it in bulk just start to go quieter in your brain.
Isn't that, it's so the truth, and it's just the sad truth of everything.
Yeah. And like, it's sad because I don't feel like I notice everyone, and I'm like really appreciative and genuine and polite, but like, just that the brain doesn't focus that way, like, makes me feel guilty, like, for those people. I'm just like, oh, I want to like value you more because like it means so much.
Yeah. All right. Well,
yeah. Let's
all just, send some positive juju out there. You can finish the edit looking good November 29th, because then Scott knows even more than I do how much work you have ahead of you. So hopefully it all goes well.
Yeah.
And everybody should just pay attention. You go watch, you got time. It's Halloween. You get a little spooked.
You mentioned Greg again just now, and Greg and Dana are just the most supreme hype masters I've ever met, I think. They've mastered the game of Patreon and know how to really get people hyped up about things. So I would imagine, as you mentioned earlier, advertising is such a big learning curve for you, and it's something that you've embraced. What is maybe, whether it's from them or elsewhere, some bit of knowledge that you've learned that you're going to be applying to future things that any creative could be applying to their future projects?
For me, it's about networking and having a good group of people around you, because what I think I've learned about this day and age is the more I can learn about marketing to be able to do it myself, the more I'm still like 10 steps behind people that know what they're doing. And the internet is full of those people. So everyone's competing for that screen real estate, that screen space. And so I might know better things now where I'm like, if your product looks good, you can send out press kits. But even then, like, Greg and Dana like have a lot of people that they've made acquaintances in the last 10 years of running their website, and like getting Week in Weird to be like millions of people checking out their website every week. They've got the access and the connections that even if I kind of took what they were doing and tried to do it myself, it would still be kind of like a pale imitation. Mm-hmm. And I'm like a private person. I don't have a big network. So it's kind of lucky that the Hellier crew even like fell together as it did, where everyone has their own unique set of skills. I encourage very much that like if people are going to spend money or time, that marketing is an important one. I know that it's intimidating in terms of like, well, do I invest in like a Facebook ad, or do I invest in this or that? I think finding a person that is savvy and well connected in that world and is excited about the project and is working on it with you, I think that that's invaluable, because otherwise your poster can look great, your trailer can look great, the product can look great, maybe that'll catch fire, but it's such a hard battle to do that. So it's not the easiest advice because it's not like, oh, cool, I'll just go do this tomorrow. Trying to get out there and find people with those skills, even if you have to pay them for it, is worth it if your product is ready for that kind of distribution.
The manipulative part of me wants you to try to talk about Stanley ghosts, but you don't have to answer the question with the Stanley ghost. Obviously, I want to hear as many of those stories as we can, but we're just kind of running a little, tight on time. But in terms of that question, what is the best weird or ghost story that you think everybody else should also know? In other words, it isn't mainstream.
So, well, without the premise of it being like a story, I think everyone should know like a folklore of some sorts. My probably weirdest story that happened to me that I think is interesting and sort of like casts all this ghosts and stuff in a different light. This happened to me up at the Stanley. I worked at the Stanley Hotel as a resident paranormal investigator for about 5 years, leading the groups of people around the property on weekend ghost hunts.
Okay, so wait a minute, so you were like living there.
I wasn't living there, but I was up there like anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 days a week.
Oh, wow.
In the end, I came away with like 250 investigations on the property. So we covered the place. But this one was only one of my first few. It was a lot more active up there in my first few months. This was in December. It was a little bit before New Year's. I'm investigating with Connor from Hellier and Spirits of Stanley and the old investigator of the hotel, whose name was Callie. We were up there. It wasn't a public night. There was just the three of us. It was kind of quiet in the concert hall building. By the way, don't let this discourage you from staying there. It's a beautiful property. It's a lovely place. Very scenic, picturesque, great presence to the building. But I realized I should say that because if this story is all that we have walking away from it after this conversation, you're definitely not going to want to stay there.
I'll think about it.
So forgive me. This is my first chance to investigate in one of the haunted rooms because it's open that night. So we go to room 1302 in the manor house, and we're hanging out. We're doing a little ghost hunting for like an hour. It's kind of quiet, and I'm laying down on the bed. It's probably 2 a.m. at this point, and my weakest moment as a ghost hunter here, the only time this has happened to me, I start to doze off. And in my head, I see this super vivid image pop into my head, and it's a face looking back at me, almost like I'm looking at it through a peephole in a door. But it's not like a human face. It's half man, half pig, with like these kind of goblin-y ears sticking out and like a couple little wisps of hair on an otherwise bald head. But instead of eyes, there's only these two eye sockets looking back at me. I'm looking at this thing for like a couple seconds, and it doesn't bother me. Like, I'm not feeling particularly freaked out or anything. But as soon as it starts to occur to me that I'm like, wait, this is a little weird, I snap right out of it. I wake up. I was only out for probably like 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It was not like I'd really fallen asleep. It was kind of a light doze. And I grunt, and Connor and Callie are like, what happened? And I was like, well, here's this thing that just happened. And they go, dude, you're freaking us out. And I go, like, don't be too freaked. Like, I don't feel like it's necessarily like here with us or like definitely not evil or anything, but I saw this thing in my head. And Callie says, no, you're freaking me out because the resident psychic at the hotel, Madame Vera, who's got a little office where she does readings in the basement of the main building, she described that exact same thing in that exact same room about a year before that.
Wow.
And that's when I was like, well, now you're freaking me out. Because like, I don't profess to have any psychic abilities. I'm not the most sensitive of ghost hunters. This just popped into my head. But it gets a little weirder in the validation sense because she described this thing as an elemental spirit older than the hotel itself. And about a month later, I was writing an article for a ghost hunting magazine, and I was writing about the famous elemental spirit of Lep Castle in Ireland. And I was reading the old journal entries that the wife of the owner in like, I think the 20s that first experienced this thing, she described that elemental as half man, half animal, and with eyes so black they looked like or were eye sockets. And
crazy.
That I didn't know about that when I had my experience. So to have all these like layers of validation on this one little 20-second experience added a lot more weight to what could have just been like a random vivid dream on a ghost hunt. It seemed like there was a little bit something more to.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that might speak volumes to the idea of going to a haunted place as part of an investigation and just kind of getting into that meditative state, just not trying, just barely being, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that headspace is very important. And I think sometimes the conscious mind might rule out or shut out a lot of otherwise kind of odd experiences.
And Max, you might want to go there and not meditate.
Never fall asleep.
Or yeah.
Were there any moments that you had in the Stanley where you were like, I got to get the hell out of here?
Not too many. I mean, every once in a while, like
that means
see, that's the perfect reaction.
not too many. Like 80% of the time, I felt very safe. No, I never encountered anything up there that felt like demonic or particularly negative. We'd have a couple, like, I mean, in 250 nights, there was probably like less than 5 that got really weird and uncomfortable and kind of like raised our eyebrows a little bit, but never became recurring experiences. I think that like people up there, there's a lot of stuff that passes through, especially when like events happen or used to happen, as the case is. You know, you get a lot of those paracelebs from TV shows and guest speakers and fans that are like, I want ghosts and demons. And you get a lot of weird stuff passing through on those weekends, which is when a lot of those weird feelings would kind of hit. Overall, the place, it's lovely. It's beautiful. Like, it's super worth the visit. The spirits are all very friendly, if not a little bit shy and tired of people looking for them. But yeah, it's not The Shining. It's not inhuman, creepy ghost adventures kind of stuff. It's a very lovely place.
And when you talk about the uncomfortable, what is it? Is it just a feeling? Is it an impression? Or is an object being thrown? Or what is it exactly?
On any given ghost hunt, like as soon as stuff starts to happen, if you're in the right headspace, it's easy to get very nervous and kind of excited and freaked out, right? But in a lot of those strange nights, it's like just kind of a weird enough stuff that's happening to some people that seems a little questionable. Kind of like what happened to me, but you know, if you see like an animal's face in front of you while you're wide awake, you might get, you know, pretty freaked out about that. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely kind of a feeling, like it's an undeniable feeling of like getting freaked out. Perhaps some of the devices you're using to communicate might start saying some kind of nasty or negative stuff that just kind of like, if there's a psychic or a sensitive saying things, it kind of adds kind of a general collective air of discomfort. That there's plenty of things I could say about those things operating on each other and every, you know, case by case situation as to how objective that is. But it was rare enough that there were a few nights that seemed different than letting imaginations run away with us, which happens much more frequently.
Really well put. Because I was going to say, like, do moments like that make you more eager to seek out additional evidence, or do you want to try to prove certain things wrong, or are you just kind of looking for good stories?
I mean, I'm always looking for personal experiences, but I have a super critical brain. If I didn't love this stuff and kind of believe in this stuff, like I'd be a skeptic about it all. So for me, like I want the personal experiences because I'm passionate about it, but I want validation for those experiences because I'm critical about it. So I'm not out there like messing around with too many people's evidence and trying to tear it down or trying to get my own, because I don't think that, you know, a good photo or a good video or audio clip is going to convince anyone that doesn't believe, because I don't actually believe that's like scientific evidence. But I think that personal experiences are everything for most people. And that said, I also know the power of the brain. So I'm always looking for validation to strengthen those experiences and allow me to trust in those experiences without trying to like prove them to the mass audience.
I think the story involving a half man, half pig with no eyes is definitely meriting of Karl Pfeiffer. Welcome to the Fantastic Story Society, our latest inductee. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm honored.
We'll send you a little Boy Scout badge.
There we go.
I'll wear it with pride.
And everybody, Hellier.tv is your go-to source. You can sign up for the mailing list there to get all the updates. There is already a teaser trailer out, and there will be another trailer out very shortly after this podcast airs. And of course, before the end of the year, for sure, season 2 of Hellier available to anybody that has Amazon Prime.
All right, Karl, we appreciate your time and good luck with the editing. Also, remember, there are always stories around you. Just got to find them. If nothing else, you can come back to the Fantastic Story Society and find them here. So thanks for listening, everybody.